My brother recently proposed to my fiancée, and I am feeling really upset about the whole situation. To give some background, my brother Mark, who is 26 years old, used to date my fiancée Jen, who is also 26, about a year ago. Their relationship lasted for only a month back in August 2022. Mark ended things with her because he became bored and never really wanted to settle down in the first place. At the time they were dating, I was living in another state, so I had no idea Mark even had a girlfriend and didn't know who Jen was until I met her in January when I moved back. I met Jen at a bar, and we really hit it off quickly. She is the most beautiful and intelligent woman I have ever met. We met several times after that, and eventually we made our relationship official. By December, I felt ready to introduce her to my family. I mentioned her to my parents and suggested they meet her during our Christmas gathering. Though my family knew I was in a relationship, I had only shared limited details about Jen because I wanted to be sure about our future together before opening up. During Christmas dinner, my parents asked to see some pictures of Jen. As my phone was being passed around the table, Mark saw it and became furious. He confronted me, calling me out for dating his ex-girlfriend and demanded that I break up with her. I refused to comply, and when I spoke to Jen about it, she confirmed their past relationship and explained why they broke up. After a few weeks, Mark seemed to drop the issue, and I thought he was finally over it. Then, on Jen's birthday this year, I took her out for a nice dinner which included both our families and her close friends. I proposed to her, feeling confident in our love. However, Mark had another meltdown. He exploded with anger at my proposal, but my sisters and I quickly shut down his outbursts. That incident happened just this past weekend. For a couple of months, Mark had been quiet, and I assumed he had chosen to stay away from me, which I was fine with. He then invited Jen and me to a family dinner at his apartment, along with my parents and sisters. I found the invitation a bit odd, but since my family was going too, we decided to attend. The dinner was nice and casual, and afterward, we moved to the living room for conversation. About 30 minutes into our chat, Mark suddenly stood up and announced that he had something important to share. He gave a lengthy speech about how happy he was to have his family gathered for such a big moment, then unexpectedly got down on one knee and pulled out a cheap ring, asking Jen to marry him. Jen was clearly confused and uncomfortable with the situation. She told Mark to put the ring away and stand up. As my dad tried to intervene and stop him, I reached him first and punched Mark out of pure anger. I didn't pay much attention to the words that were exchanged in the heat of the moment, but I remember Mark saying something about wanting to prove that Jen wasn't really into me and was only trying to get back at him. After things calmed down, my parents quickly escorted me out and promised to talk to him. It has now been a few days since that dinner, and I am still furious about what happened. I am worried that this incident may cause Jen to have second thoughts about marrying me. I don't know how to approach this situation, and I feel stuck. In the comments I received after sharing my story, some important points were brought up. I want to clarify that Jen and I are newly engaged, and even though our relationship moved quickly, I believe we are both committed to each other for the long haul. When I met Jen, I was the one who approached her first. I asked her if she knew about Mark and her past, and she claimed she had no idea who he was. I had no reason not to believe her, but Mark's reaction certainly raises questions. Lastly, I want to emphasize that I had no idea that Jen and Mark had dated before I met her, and Mark and I have not been close for a long time, so this situation is even more complicated. We gradually started to drift apart, and our conversations became less frequent as time went on. By the time I made the decision to move back, we really hadn't spoken much at all, except for on special occasions like our birthdays. Jen was aware of my family, but she didn't know much about them until I felt ready to introduce her. When Jen and Mark met again, I didn't feel any lingering feelings between them. She didn't act as if he were a complete stranger, but she also wasn't overly warm or affectionate toward him either. I learned that their relationship had lasted only about a month, which made me question whether I needed Mark's approval to propose to Jen. Perhaps I was mistaken in thinking I didn't need to ask for that. I wasn't sure. Regardless, I made plans to talk to Mark that weekend to clear the air and understand everything better. I had never asked him what his side of the relationship was, which I now see as my oversight for not doing my homework. If anything significant happens that sheds light on this situation, I will provide an update, but for now, this is where things stand. As for comments from others, I noticed some people suggesting I shouldn't worry about Mark's family, and thankfully, I haven't heard much from them. Aside from my mom and a few aunts, my family knows enough about my relationship to understand that I won't tolerate any disrespect, particularly toward my fiancé. They wouldn't waste their breath on Mark, and I'm confident that Jen feels the same way about him, finding it safe to say she can't stand him either, which adds a touch of humor to the situation. Now, onto the update. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who took the time to read my post. It has been a hectic weekend, and I haven't had the chance to respond to many individual comments. However, I did include answers to the most common questions that came up in the original post's comments. Thank you once again. I appreciate all the feedback, including the criticisms. Moving on to the details of the update, I reached out to Mark and suggested we meet at my place for a discussion. I expressed that it would be better if Jen were there too, but I understood if he preferred it to be just the two of us. He agreed to have both of us present and arrived at my place around noon today. The atmosphere was quite quiet for a few moments before I decided to initiate the conversation. I started by apologizing for not giving him a heads up about my plans to propose to Jen, and I also apologized for hitting him during a previous encounter. He brushed off my apology, saying it was no big deal, but he did appreciate that I acknowledged it. As we talked, I shared what Jen had mentioned about her past relationship with Mark and how it ended. I asked him to confirm if what she said was accurate. I honestly conveyed that his reactions throughout this entire situation had seemed quite extreme, and I needed to ensure I wasn't misinterpreting the seriousness of their past relationship. He confirmed that they had dated for just a few weeks and that he broke up with her because he lost interest. When Jen asked Mark if his behavior stemmed from any lingering feelings or regrets about their breakup, he admitted that he found her more attractive than he had remembered, but he insisted that there were no underlying feelings or regrets. He explained that he simply didn't feel comfortable seeing her with his older brother and felt I was wrong to pursue a relationship with her, considering she had been his ex. I reminded him that I had no prior knowledge of their history, so it wasn't like I had intentionally disrespected him or their past. He dismissed my explanation and insisted that I should have ended things out of respect for him. He was adamant that if the situation were reversed, he would have done the same thing, but I had my doubts about that. I then asked him why he proposed to Jen if he didn't have any feelings left for her. He explained that during a conversation with one of his friends who had been around when Mark and Jen were together, the friend suggested that maybe Jen had always known we were related and was using this situation to get back at him. Since Mark believed Jen had still been hung up on him after their breakup, he and his friend thought it would be a good idea to test the waters and see if they were right. That's when he came up with the idea to propose and see if she would break up with me for him. Jen pressed him further about why he thought she was still hung up on him, and he claimed he had heard that she was asking about him after they had separated. They were still frequenting the same places they used to enjoy together, which made it easy for him to assume that she might unexpectedly show up with his brother. This only confirmed what he had suspected all along. Jen informed him that she had only inquired about him one time after their breakup. She mentioned that she had been visiting those spots with friends long before their relationship started, and she had no intention of avoiding them just because they had ended things. Additionally, she expressed her offense at the thought that she would stoop so low as to pursue him merely as a way to retaliate against his brother. He shrugged and offered a half-hearted apology but insisted that she needed to understand his perspective. He asked her if she truly had no idea about the similarities between him and his brother, to which she replied that she hadn't noticed any resemblance until they were actually in the same space together. She pointed out that they acted nothing alike, so the thought never crossed her mind. He accepted her explanation, and that pretty much concluded their discussion. Before he departed, he mentioned that he could no longer attend the wedding since he couldn't support the relationship knowing that he had once been with Jen. He left it to her to take back his invitation, but she assured him that it wouldn't be necessary since he was likely going to be uninvited anyway. A few hours passed after their conversation, and she felt a sense of relief. While her parents were not thrilled about the decision to uninvite him, they recognized that it was a joint decision and likely for the best. Her sisters chimed in, acknowledging that they understood he lacked a solid reason for acting the way he had been, and they didn't blame her for wanting him out of the celebration. Moving forward, she decided to limit her contact with Mark and doubted he would reach out anytime soon. She appreciated everyone for reading and commenting on her situation and promised to provide updates if anything significant occurred. In response to a question from the comments about why Jen didn't know about her family, she explained that they had not discussed her family much in their early days together. After leaving home to escape certain family tensions, specifically with her parents, she began to reconcile with them at her sister's suggestion when she moved back. When Jen asked about her family, she was open about her distance from them and had no problem with being kept in the dark given the situation. Update 2 explained that about 2 weeks after the previous update, she had combined them into one post for the sake of clarity. This was likely due to an update being removed or stuck in moderation on a subreddit that she could not post to, prompting her to share everything directly on her profile for those interested in her story. It had been a while since she last posted, and she had limited her communication with Mark since their last discussion. They hadn't spoken on the phone, and their interactions were confined to family gatherings. However, her mother became increasingly upset about the fact that Mark remained uninvited to her wedding. This issue first surfaced during a birthday celebration for her younger sister, Sophie, who was 22. During the festivities, Sophie's boyfriend proposed to her, sparking a conversation about her dream wedding plans. She started sharing her ideas, including thoughts about a destination wedding, cake designs, and dress styles. In the midst of this cheerful discussion, Sophie innocently remarked that even though Mark was banned from her wedding, she hoped her brother wouldn't mind if Mark attended hers. She laughed off the comment, stating she couldn't possibly be upset about Sophie's guest list, regardless of her feelings. Yet, her mother shot her a peculiar look and asked if Mark was indeed still uninvited. When she confirmed this, her mother expressed irritation, insisting she had thought it was a joke. She accused her daughter of being unreasonable for proceeding with the decision to exclude him, claiming it was petty of her to hold a grudge, considering Mark was family. She reminded her parent that it was a mutual choice between her and Mark to keep things that way. She emphasized that the focus of the day should be on Sophie, and if Mark or anyone else wanted to discuss her wedding, they could do so at another time. Sophie intervened, defending her sister and expressing that the focus should remain on her special day. Sophie confronted my mom about trying to turn her special day into something about Mark. After that conversation, my mom decided to drop the subject. For those who are curious, Mark wasn't at Sophie's party because he had to work, which prevented him from attending. A few days later, my mom visited my house, saying she wanted to talk about my upcoming wedding. She questioned why I was so determined to keep Mark from coming. Her argument was that I should not feel insecure about the history Mark had with Jen, and she believed that excluding him was going too far. I explained to her that Mark and I had both agreed he would not come to the wedding. If he had any issues with that decision, he could come to me directly. This led to a heated argument where she insisted that if I was not going to re-invite Mark, she would also choose not to attend the wedding because she felt I was ostracizing him. I shrugged in response and told her that if she felt that way, she could throw her invitation away because I wouldn't beg her to come. She inquired if I would truly be okay with her absence, reminding me that this wouldn't be the first time she missed one of my events because of Mark. I pointed out that she was throwing her past mistakes back in my face, which only made her angrier. In frustration, she stormed out. After that, I began receiving calls and messages from her and several family members, insisting that I was in the wrong and urging me to invite Mark to keep the peace. Jen was also getting messages from my mom, asking her to speak with me and convince me to change my mind, but as far as I knew, Jen had not responded to those requests. Most of my mom's side of the family stood with her and decided not to come to the wedding, while my dad, along with his sister, brother-in-law, and their 2 kids, supported my decision and planned to attend. My sisters were also still going, along with Jen's family. I talked to Mark about his feelings regarding the lack of an invitation. He told me he had actually uninvited himself and didn't understand all the fuss since he still didn't want to attend. Mark advised me to keep him out of the family drama, saying that he would tell my mom the same thing if asked. As of now, I have been keeping mostly low contact with my mom while maintaining decent terms with my dad. I'm still considering whether to re-invite my mom and her family if they decide to change their minds about not attending, but the chances of that happening seem low. I shared my thoughts with my dad, and he understood. In the meantime, Jen and I began to think about downsizing the wedding venue since our guest list was now significantly smaller. About 2 weeks later, my mom came by, saying she wanted to clear the air and discuss everything. We agreed to sit down for dinner together. Jen prepared a plate of food for her, and I asked my mom if she was still planning not to come to the wedding. She replied that while she wanted to attend, she couldn't get over my decision not to invite Mark because of what she called a simple mistake. I reminded her that Mark's simple mistake was proposing to my fiancée while I was sitting less than 3 feet away from him. She dismissed it as just a joke. Jen also asked my mom why she wanted to talk if she was still holding the same stance on Mark attending the wedding. My mom explained she wanted to talk to Jen in hopes that Jen would be able to convince me to invite Mark again. Apparently, she thought I was at work and assumed she would catch Jen alone. Jen politely explained that while she understood where my mom was coming from, she wouldn't engage in that conversation without me present since it involved my brother. My mom then accused Jen of being spineless and unable to speak for herself without me thinking for her. This led to a tense exchange among the 3 of us until Jen firmly told her to leave. As my mom got up to leave, she followed Jen toward the door, further escalating the situation. My parents decided to give me an allowance, but only if I completed household chores like mowing the lawn, taking out the trash, and raking leaves. This allowance usually amounted to around $25 each week, which was meant to help me start saving money. My brother Mark noticed that I was earning this money and began to beg our parents for an allowance of his own. Instead of having him do chores like I did, my parents decided to give him $10 from my allowance each week. They justified this by saying that both of us were doing an excellent job with our chores. However, Mark never helped out with any chores. Whenever I asked him for assistance, he would simply tell me that it wasn't his job and that he had no reason to bother. Because of this, I started to distance myself from him. By the time I got to high school, our conversations were limited to when we needed to ask each other for small favors or when it was absolutely necessary. When I turned 17, I decided to get my first job because I wanted to buy my own car and earn money that my parents couldn't force me to share with Mark. My oldest sister Maggie played a significant role in helping me open my own bank account. She also taught me the basics of budgeting and saving money. After much hard work, I finally bought my first car at 18. When Mark got his driver's license, my parents asked me if I could let him use my car for practice and to get around. Although I was reluctant, I agreed. At first, the arrangement worked fine. Mark used the car when I didn't need it and helped maintain it reasonably well. However, things changed when he expressed a desire for our parents to buy him his own car. My mother approached me and insisted that I give my car to Mark because, in her opinion, he needed it more than I did. When I refused to comply, she threatened to kick me out of the house. This led to a heated argument that night, which concluded with her giving Mark my car and insisting that I transfer ownership to him in the following days. With no other place to go at that time, I felt forced to go along with it and signed over the car. When I graduated high school, neither of my parents attended the ceremony. They skipped it because Mark didn't want to sit through a long event just to watch me receive my diploma, and my mother didn't want to leave him alone at home. This left me with only the support of my sisters, along with my aunt and uncle, who wanted to take me out to celebrate. However, my parents insisted they bring me back home, where they prepared a dinner to make up for their absence. Unfortunately, the dinner turned out to be a disaster for me since my mother served shrimp and chicken on the same dish, and I am allergic to shellfish. In my first year after high school, I worked 2 jobs to save up for another car. As the new school year began, I moved away for college and cut off contact with my family. Initially, my mother tried to reach me through social media and my sister Sophie, but I ignored her messages. I warned Sophie that she would be cut off as well if she kept trying to communicate with me. When my mother couldn't get through to me via Sophie, she attempted to contact my older sisters Charlotte and Maggie, as well as Mark. Eventually, I felt compelled to threaten my mother with a restraining order for harassment. Although I had no idea how to file one, the threat seemed to scare her away. The only communication I received from her afterward were occasional happy holiday texts. As time passed and I moved back home, Charlotte informed me that my parents had started seeing a family therapist at her urging. They wanted to apologize for how they had treated us. I was cautious about this and agreed to meet them only if they were sincere. The process of reconciliation began when I returned home, but it was a challenging journey that didn't come close to addressing everything I had been through with them. When I met Jen, I felt uncertain about where my relationship with her was heading, as well as what my relationship with my parents would become. I deliberately avoided mentioning my family because I was ready to cut off contact again if necessary. Jen was understanding of my desire to keep that part of my life private, and she didn't press me for more information. I hope this clarifies some of the questions I've seen in comments regarding why I didn't make the reconciliation contingent upon my parents reimbursing me for the car. In the end, getting reimbursed for the car wasn't a hill I was willing to die on. I stood firm on this issue because the damage to my family had already been done, and even now, it is difficult to accept that Mark was somehow favored among us. It is not that there was anything particularly extraordinary about him. I do not mean to offend, but he was just an average kid. My parents did not face any fertility struggles when he was born. He was not a miracle child, nor was he seen as a solution to their marriage difficulties. They simply had him, and then they chose to love him more than they loved us. They were aware that their actions were not typical. They did not believe it was normal behavior. It seemed as though they had a soft spot for Mark because he was their son, and they thought that made him deserving of more affection and attention. Whenever someone suggested the possibility of me being adopted, it was clear that I was biologically tied to them. Unfortunately, even if they wanted to pretend otherwise, they could not deny me as their child. It used to be easy to come up with excuses for their behavior, but eventually, I had to face the fact that they were just 2 individuals who should never have become parents in the first place. Now, about the recent developments in my life, I want to express my appreciation to everyone who has taken the time to offer advice about my situation and for all the kind messages and comments I've received over the past days and weeks. Jan and I have read these comments together, and we are grateful for all the support. To address the most common question regarding my decision to reconnect with my family after everything that transpired, the concise answer is that I would do anything for my sisters. When Charlotte announced she was having her first child, she wished for the entire family to be present to support her during this significant time. She did not want relatives who would only show up for birthdays and holidays. She desired a full-time family presence. Growing up, Charlotte rarely asked for much, so when she expressed her wish for us to try and be a family again, I felt compelled to agree, as it would bring her happiness. Part of me also hoped that perhaps my parents had changed for the better. I do not regret my choice to attempt to reconcile. Even though my parents remain terrible, this journey led me to meet the love of my life, which I consider a definite victory. In response to those who have been asking for updates, I want to share what has happened recently, and I apologize in advance if this explanation seems jumbled or unclear, as a lot has occurred. We have filed a report with the police, and while Jen does not wish to pursue any further action, the officers informed us that the decision is not solely ours to make. They mentioned that they would take our preferences into consideration. We managed to gather solid evidence of the assault, which included photographs of Jen's injuries and text messages from my parents discussing the incident. They advised us to document any future incidents involving my mother, just in case something else happens, which is a wise precaution given our living situation. While it is doubtful that this will lead anywhere, at least we have our evidence on record. Following our report, I received about 100 angry text messages from my mother claiming that she had spoken to Jen. She confronted me at my workplace, yelling about how I was trying to ruin her life. She berated me for being a terrible son, insisting that I was overreacting to a minor misunderstanding. She failed to comprehend why she should face any consequences for her actions. I told her that if she did not want to find herself in legal trouble, she should not have hit Jen. She demanded that I contact the police and ask them to disregard the report, but I stood my ground. I explained to her exactly what the officer had told me about it being out of our hands now. This only led to her throwing a fit in the parking lot, during which she hit me a few times on my chest and arm before security stepped in to intervene and removed her from the property. Afterward, I had to speak with my boss about what had happened. Unfortunately, she was quite understanding after I explained the situation. When I got home, I relayed everything that had transpired to Jen. She was understandably upset and suggested that we sit down to discuss our plan for dealing with my family moving forward. This discussion took a long time, but we decided to take the advice of some users on Reddit and go completely no contact with my family, with the exception of my sisters. We agreed that allowing my parents into our lives would only create unnecessary stress for both of us, especially since we are not even married yet. Jen expressed that she was considering moving away to put some distance between us and my family, noting that she had been trying to stay out of the chaos that often surrounds my family dynamics. She made a strong effort to stay out of the conflicts in my family, understanding that it wasn't her position to get involved. However, she drew the line when it came to my mother's behavior and my father's role in enabling that behavior. A significant amount was discussed during our conversation, too much to capture in this single post, but we both reached a clear agreement. We recognized that my parents brought more strain into our lives than was worth enduring. I also expressed my desire to no longer tolerate the situation, and together, we decided it was essential for me to seek therapy. She offered to assist me in finding a therapist who could help. Following our discussion, I took the step to contact my dad and inform him of my decision to cease communication with him. The first attempt to call him was unsuccessful. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail requesting to have an in-depth conversation when he was free. When he eventually returned my call, he inquired whether it would be acceptable for my mom to join the discussion. I agreed, recognizing that she also needed to hear my perspective. The conversation unfolded as one might anticipate given the circumstances. I clearly stated to both of my parents that Jan and I were choosing to distance ourselves from them. My dad reacted strongly, demanding to know the reasoning behind my decision, especially after the efforts made to repair our relationship over the years. I explained that the recent situation involving Mark had made it painfully clear to me that the relationship wasn't truly mended. I conveyed that, from my perspective, my parents seemed to prioritize my mom and my younger brother above all else. Their ongoing favoritism toward Mark had driven a wedge between us that felt insurmountable, leading me to conclude that I could no longer invest in a relationship that was failing. I shared that I had initially agreed to try to mend things for Charlotte's sake, but the disrespect shown towards both me and Jen was unacceptable, and I was unwilling to tolerate it any longer, both for my own well-being and for Jen's. Specifically addressing my mom, I expressed how exhausted I was from being treated as a scapegoat for her poor parenting choices and Mark's negative behavior. I firmly told her that I would never forgive her for the things she had done to both Jen and me, as well as our sisters during our upbringing. In response, she began to suggest that I should just move on, like my sisters had. I interrupted her, saying that she should really take their forgiveness and let go, as she would never receive that from me, especially considering her actions over the last few weeks. At this point, she broke down in tears, asking how I could paint her as a villain in this situation. I insisted that her anger should be directed at herself, as I had done nothing wrong in my eyes. Her tears intensified as she told me how much she regretted having me and claimed that I had done nothing but try to ruin her life. This comment sparked an intense argument between her and Jen, with Jen passionately defending me and expressing her disgust at my mom's hurtful words. At some point, my mom either left the room or simply fell silent after Jen finished speaking. My dad then expressed his discomfort with the idea of being shut out of my life. He urged me to try to understand my mom's perspective, arguing that she was grappling with the difficulties of parenting and that it was unfair for me to punish her for her challenges. He concluded by stating that we were a family and that I should not let past mistakes hinder our ability to move forward together. I countered his points by stating that my mom's primary concern seemed to be her own interests and those of Mark, and there was nothing he could say to change my mind. I made it clear to him that it was his choice whether to maintain my contact information, but I was going to block both him and my mom everywhere else. After making my decision clear, I ended the call. Following the conversation, I took my feelings and frustrations and composed a lengthy email to my family members. In it, I detailed my decision to invite everyone to my wedding except for my aunt and uncle and my sisters. After writing the email, I hadn't cried in what felt like ages, but Jen comforted me as I let out my emotions. She promised that we would be okay despite everything. My sisters reached out after reading my message, and I took a moment to apologize to Charlotte for not being able to continue the reconciliation she desired. She reassured me that it was fine and that the situation wasn't my fault. The reactions from my family have varied significantly. Some members expressed anger over the fact that I chose to share our family issues publicly on the internet. Family issues can often become complicated, especially when they unfold in a public space like an internet forum. Many people have expressed their anger towards my parents because they were unaware of how serious things had gotten. The last significant conversation I had about everything was with Mark. During that discussion, he inquired whether I was going to stop talking to him as well. I reassured him that I had no intention of cutting him off, but also mentioned that I wouldn't be making any effort to reach out to him either. Mark accepted this without argument and simply wished me well with my wedding. Since that brief conversation, we haven't communicated again. Currently, my partner Jen and I are searching for a new home. Our goal is to move closer to Jen's brother, who lives about 3 hours away from our current location. We both really like the city he resides in and believe it will be a better fit for us. I have already discussed the possibility of transferring to a different position with my boss, while Jen is exploring options that would allow her to work entirely remotely, or possibly find a new job in the area we plan to move to. Due to our changed circumstances and a significantly smaller guest list, we have decided to alter our wedding venue. Jen's father is considering allowing us to use his lake house for the wedding, which could be a beautiful setting for our special day. I do not intend to share any further updates about our situation unless something drastic occurs, at least not until after the wedding, as I want to focus on moving forward with my life. However, I remain open to answering any questions you might have. It has taken me several days to get this post ready because I felt the need to remove certain details to ensure clarity. If there is anything that seems unclear, I will do my best to respond to questions. I also anticipate some challenges after we move, particularly from my mom. I expect she will try to track us down when we relocate, as she tends to become obsessive whenever she feels her control is slipping away. To preemptively address this issue, I consulted a lawyer friend about the possibility of obtaining a restraining order against her to prevent her from following us. Thank you to everyone for the kind wishes. I wish you all happy holidays. As for whether my mom has read the comments on the forum, according to Sophie, she has seen quite a few and believes that people on Reddit do not have the right to judge her character. I am at the point where I feel there is no capacity for reconciliation. I wish my parents the best, but I hope they remain as far away from me and my life as possible.